Family took out a $500K mortgage in my name. Pay for your sister. It's your duty. I smiled, but my name is Naomi Carter. I'm 29 years old. The day I found out my family had taken a $500,000 mortgage in my name, I didn't scream. I didn't throw the mail across my small Austin apartment. I just stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, a single sheet of paper trembling in my hand as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, and I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a sharp, brittle thing, a crack in the smooth facade I had maintained for 29 years. It was the smile of someone who finally understood the rules of a game she never knew she was playing. I already knew how the story would end, just not how sweet the silence would feel after. It started with a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a pizza coupon and a credit card offer. The envelope was thick and official, bearing the name Liberty National Bank. I almost tossed it, assuming it was junk mail, but a cold sense of unease made me stop. I slid my finger under the flap. I unfolded the letter, and the dense legal jargon swam before my eyes until they snagged on a string of numbers that felt like a punch to the gut. Delinquent mortgage balance 512-304-47. My breath caught in my throat. It had to be a mistake. A massive, terrifying clerical error. I'd never bought a house. I rented, then my gaze drifted down the page and found the property address. It wasn't mine. It was a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, the one with the big oak tree and wraparound porch. My sister's house. In that instant, the confusion vanished, replaced by a clarity so cold it burned. Every strange conversation from the past few months suddenly clicked into place. My mother asking for a copy of my driver's license for a family insurance plan. My father mentioning how proud he was of my perfect credit score. They weren't just proud. They were shopping. I sank onto a kitchen chair, the letter clutched in my fist. They thought I would fix this, just like I fixed everything else. They expected me to quietly absorb the debt and the betrayal. That's when I smiled for real. They had started a story using my name, but I was the one who was going to write the ending. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. To understand how my family could do something so monstrous, you have to understand the universe they created. It was a solar system with only one sun, my sister Lauren. Everything and everyone else, including me, were just small rocky planets caught in her gravitational pull. She was the bright one, the social one, the one with the dazzling smile and the effortless charm that made people want to give her the world. My parents were her most devoted worshippers. In their eyes, Lauren could do no wrong. She was the future of the Carter family, a phrase my father would use at holidays, his chest puffed out with pride. I was the mechanic, the quiet, steady background character whose only job was to make sure the star of the show could always shine. My role was never spoken of, but it was reinforced daily through a series of small, life-altering transactions that I was taught to interpret as love. My entire life was a series of phone calls that began with a soft, loving tone that barely concealed the demand within. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I was its most dedicated student. I remember one specific Tuesday afternoon when I was 24. I was at my desk, neck deep in a complex logistics report that was due by the end of the day. My boss was counting on it. I was in the zone. The numbers were finally making sense, and I felt that rare, satisfying click of productivity. Then my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her tone was a carefully crafted performance of panic. "Naomi, honey, thank God you answered. It's your sister." Her car broke down on the freeway again. She's all alone and she's so flustered. The familiar script. I closed my eyes, the spreadsheet on my screen blurring. "Mom, I'm at work. I have a major deadline. Can't Dad go?" A heavy sigh crackled through the phone. "Oh, you know your father is in the middle of a big project. And I have my book club. You're the closest, sweetie. She's your sister. Please." The unspoken words hung in the air. Don't be difficult. Don't be selfish. This is what you do. So I did it. I apologized to my boss, packed up my things under his disappointed gaze, and forfeited any chance of leaving on time. The 45-minute drive to the stretch of highway where Lauren was stranded was filled with a low, simmering resentment. When I got there, I found her sitting on the guardrail, filing her nails, looking more bored than distressed. Her car, a trendy convertible my parents had bought her for her college graduation, was tilted at an awkward angle on the shoulder. "Took you long enough," she greeted me, not even looking up. "This is literally ruining my day. I'm going to be late for drinks with Ashley." There was no "thank you for leaving work." No, "I'm so glad you're here." Just the expectation that my time was a resource to be deployed at her convenience. I dealt with the tow truck driver, a gruff man who looked at Lauren's helpless act with unconcealed skepticism. I paid his fee with my credit card because, of course, Lauren's wallet was in her other purse. As we sat in the tense silence of my practical paid-for sedan on the way to her apartment, she complained about her stressful day. I just gripped the steering wheel. My own stress, my blown deadline, my boss's disapproval, an irrelevant footnote in the grand drama of her life. This pattern repeated itself in endless variations. A year later, it was the car insurance. I got a frantic call from Lauren on a Saturday night. Her voice was high-pitched with real panic this time. She had been in a minor fender bender, and when she went to exchange information, she discovered her insurance had lapsed 2 months prior. "They're going to give me a ticket, Naomi. It's going to go on my record. Mom and Dad will kill me," she wailed. I spent the next hour on my laptop, navigating a clunky insurance website. I found their policy. The overdue balance was nearly $400. Money I had earmarked for a new set of tires. "Lauren, I can't afford this right now," I told her, my voice strained. "Please, Naomi, please. I'll pay you back, I swear." "I just can't ask Mom and Dad again. They'll take the car away." It was the same promise she always made, a promise that evaporated the moment the crisis was over. I knew I would never see the money, but the alternative, the screaming matches, the family drama, my mother's inevitable guilt trip call about how I should have just helped my sister, was worse. So I typed in my debit card number and hit submit. The confirmation email felt like a receipt for my own subservience. The text I got from her 10 minutes later was a simple string of emojis. A heart, a prayer hands, a smiley face. My $400, my new tires, my financial prudence was worth 3 tiny digital pictures. They called this love, this dangerous conditional affection that was given only in exchange for my utility. Their praise was a currency used to purchase my compliance. "You're so responsible, Naomi," my mother would say with a warm smile. "We don't know what we'd do without you." It was meant to be a compliment, but it always felt like a job description. This dynamic, this unspoken family hierarchy, became painfully clear as we moved into our late 20s. Lauren's life was a series of expensive abandoned hobbies, all funded by my parents. She was a photographer, then a jewelry maker, then a yoga instructor. Each new passion was celebrated, her lack of follow-through framed as a charming, artistic temperament. My life was the opposite. It was a straight line of logic and responsibility. I got a degree in logistics management, a field my father called boring but stable. I secured a good job, paid my bills on time, and slowly, painstakingly, started building a savings account. My dream was quiet and simple, but it was mine. A small condo, a space that belonged only to me. The final, clarifying moment came a few months before the letter from the bank. We were at our obligatory Sunday dinner. Lauren, glowing with self-importance, made her grand announcement. "Mom, Dad, I'm buying a house." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. My father jumped to his feet, his face beaming. "That's our girl, the homeowner." My mother was already tearing up. "Oh, Lauren, a real home. Is there a room for a nursery?" They spent the rest of the meal swiping through photos on her phone, oohing and aahing over granite countertops and a walk-in closet. No one asked the obvious question. How could she, with her sporadic income from a part-time job, possibly afford a house in the booming Austin market? The question was irrelevant. Her dream was manifesting, and in the Carter family, that was all that mattered. A few weeks later, emboldened by my own progress, I decided to share my news. "I've finally hit my savings goal," I announced, my voice a little unsteady. "I have enough for a down payment on a small condo near work." The enthusiastic chatter died instantly. My father set his fork down and looked at me over the rim of his glasses, his expression unreadable. My mother's smile became a tight, thin line. "Oh, honey," she said, and I braced myself for the gentle disappointment that always preceded a lecture. "That's practical. But are you sure now is the right time to be thinking only of yourself?" The question was so absurd I almost laughed. "What do you mean, only of myself?" "Well," she continued, carefully folding her napkin in her lap, "your sister is going to have so many new expenses. A house is a huge responsibility. She'll need help. Family has to be a priority. Being selfish just isn't a good look on you, Naomi." Selfish. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My years of disciplined saving, of working overtime, of sacrificing small pleasures to build a future for myself, that was selfish. But Lauren, diving headfirst into a massive financial obligation she couldn't possibly manage on her own, was a hero. I looked from my mother's disapproving face to my father's silent endorsement, and the last piece of my denial crumbled. They didn't see two daughters. They saw an asset and a liability, a star and a stagehand, and a stagehand doesn't get her own spotlight. Her only job is to make sure the star's light never, ever dims. The betrayal didn't start with a forged signature on a mortgage document. It started decades ago, in a quiet, unspoken contract that stated my life would always be secondary to hers. I just hadn't been brave enough to read the fine print. The truth, when it finally revealed itself, was not a single shocking revelation, but a series of cold, hard facts laid out on paper. After the initial numbness from the letter wore off, a frantic energy took over. I spent the next 2 days on the phone, navigating the bureaucratic labyrinth of Liberty National Bank. It was a special kind of hell, a circular journey through automated menus and indifferent customer service representatives. I was transferred from department to department, put on hold for what felt like hours, listening to a tinny, distorted version of a classical song that will now forever be linked in my mind with utter despair. Each person I spoke to treated me with a thinly veiled suspicion, as if I were the one trying to pull a scam. My voice grew hoarse from repeating the same sentence over and over. "My name is Naomi Carter, and I have never opened a mortgage with your bank." Finally, after threatening to report them to a regulatory agency, I was transferred to the fraud department. A weary-sounding manager named Ms. Albright, her voice devoid of any emotion, listened to my story with a sigh. It was clear she had heard it all before. "I will email you the complete loan application and the signed closing documents for your records," she said, her tone suggesting this was a tiresome but necessary part of her job. When the email arrived, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely click the mouse to open the attachment. A multi-page PDF document appeared on my screen, and a wave of nausea washed over me. It was my entire financial life, stolen and repackaged for their convenience. My full name, Naomi Catherine Carter. My social security number, my date of birth, my employment history at the logistics company, my exact salary, my assets, all correct. They had taken the very foundation of stability I had worked so hard to build, brick by painful brick, and used it to construct their castle of lies. The violation was so intimate, so profound. It felt like they had peeled back my skin and taken my bones. Then I scrolled to the signature page, and there it was. My name, signed in a confident, flowing script. It was an excellent copy, almost perfect. Lauren had always been good at art, her drawings praised and framed while my stick figures were politely ignored. She had a talent for mimicry, but they had made one crucial damning mistake, one small, arrogant detail they had overlooked. I am left-handed. My signature has always had a subtle, backward slant, the natural result of pushing a pen across a page rather than pulling it. It's a small quirk, something only a person who had watched me sign my name 1,000 times would know. The signature on this document was perfectly upright, with the confident, right-handed flair of my sister. It was a perfect forgery, but it was forged with the wrong hand. My eyes darted to the date printed next to the signature line. October 26th, 2 weeks after my 27th birthday. My blood ran cold as the memory of that night came flooding back with sickening clarity. My mom and Lauren had insisted on taking me out for a fancy birthday dinner at a restaurant I couldn't afford. It was highly unusual. My birthday was usually an afterthought, marked with a quick phone call or a belated card. But that night, they had been a whirlwind of affection, attentive and celebratory. Lauren wore a new dress, and my mother was all smiles, telling the waiter it was her wonderful, responsible daughter's special day. I remembered my mother raising her wine glass, the crystal clinking. "A toast to Naomi," she had announced, her voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "To a year of new beginnings and wonderful surprises." Lauren had hugged me then, her cheek warm against mine, the scent of her expensive perfume enveloping me. "Happy birthday, big sis," she'd whispered. "I hope this year brings you everything you deserve." I had felt so loved that night, so seen. I had allowed myself to believe, for a fleeting moment, that our fractured relationship was healing, that they were finally starting to value me as a person, not just as a function. Staring at the date on the forged document, I realized the whole evening had been a grotesque piece of theater. The new beginning they were toasting wasn't mine. It was theirs. The wonderful surprise was a $500,000 mortgage they were about to secure in my name. They had used my birthday, a celebration of my life, as a convenient alibi and a cruel, ironic cover for their crime. I wasn't being celebrated. I was being financially executed, and they were the ones serving the last meal. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling on the screen as I dialed my mother's number. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed to hear her deny it. I needed some part of this to be a terrible misunderstanding. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Naomi, hi, sweetie. I was just thinking about you. How are you? The casual warmth in her voice was like a splash of gasoline on the fire in my gut. I kept my own voice dangerously quiet, level. Mom, I got a letter today. From Liberty National Bank. A pause. It wasn't a pause of confusion. It was the pause of someone caught, their mind racing to formulate the right lie. Oh, she said, her voice instantly guarded, losing its sunny lilt. What about? It was a delinquency notice, I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. For a mortgage. On Lauren's house. A mortgage for $500,000 in my name. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a long, heavy moment. I could hear the faint sound of the television in the background of her perfect suburban home. When she finally spoke, all pretense of warmth was gone. Her voice was flat, pragmatic, as if she were explaining a simple business transaction. Naomi, it was the only way, she said. You're the stable one. Lauren needed help qualifying for the loan. Her credit isn't as good as yours. It's just paperwork. I almost choked. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my chest, but it came out as a strangled whisper. Paperwork? Mom, it's $500,000. It's grand larceny. It's a felony. You forged my signature. Don't be so dramatic, she snapped, her voice turning sharp and cold, the voice she used when I wasn't complying. It's not like we stole from a stranger. We had to make sure Lauren was taken care of. She has a future to build. You have a good job. You can handle it. It's what families do for each other. The calm, rational way she said it was what truly broke me. There was no remorse, no guilt. Just a chilling, unshakable sense of entitlement. They believed they had the right to do this. Handle it? My voice was trembling with a rage so deep it scared me. You've destroyed my future. My credit is ruined. I will never be able to buy a home of my own. You've saddled me with a debt I could never repay in 100 lifetimes. For her? It's your duty, she said, her voice hard as ice, delivering the final killing blow. Family helps family. And then she hung up. I stared at my phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The silence was deafening. The truth was finally brutally clear. In my family's story, I was not a character. I was a plot device, a tool to be used to advance the life of the real main character, my sister. And when the tool had served its purpose, it was to be put away without complaint. My only purpose, my duty, was to be used. For the next 2 weeks, my world shrank to the 4 walls of my apartment. It became a cave, a tomb, a shelter from a world that no longer made sense. Life outside continued. I could hear the distant sounds of traffic, the laughter of children in the park across the street, but none of it felt real. It was like watching a movie through a thick pane of glass. My own life had been put on an indefinite, suffocating pause. I moved through my rooms like a ghost, a silent observer in a life that no longer felt like my own. The vibrant Killam rug in my living room seemed faded. The cheerful yellow of my kitchen walls looked sickly. Everything had been tainted by the betrayal. Sleep became a stranger, a luxury I couldn't afford. I would lie in bed for hours, tangled in my sheets, staring into the oppressive darkness of my bedroom. My mind, however, refused to rest. It became a torture chamber of looping conversations, a relentless replay of my mother's cold, pragmatic words. Family helps family. Don't be so dramatic. It's your duty. Each phrase was a fresh wound, a ghostly whisper in the silent apartment, reminding me that the people who were supposed to be my safe harbor were the ones who had steered my ship directly into the rocks. They didn't see their actions as a betrayal. They saw it as their right. My stability was a family asset, a community resource, and they had simply liquidated it for their preferred beneficiary, Lauren. The thought was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I would eventually drift into a shallow, restless sleep, only to be jolted awake an hour later by a nightmare where I was endlessly signing documents as my family looked on. Smiling, I developed a physical aversion to my phone. It sat on the coffee table like a small black harbinger of doom. Every time it buzzed or lit up, a jolt of adrenaline shot through me. The screen would flash with calls from mom or dad, and a cold dread would wash over me. I couldn't speak to them. What was there to say? They had made their position clear. Any conversation would just be another assault of guilt and manipulation, another attempt to normalize the unthinkable. One afternoon, a text message from Lauren appeared on the lock screen. Hey, Mom said you were acting weird. Everything okay? Let's get brunch soon, my treat. The sheer, breathtaking ignorance of it made me feel sick to my stomach. It was the casual cruelty, the complete lack of awareness that was so devastating. She was living in a $500,000 monument to my ruin, a home purchased with my stolen future, and she was offering to buy me a stack of pancakes. The smiley face at the end of the text felt like a final, cruel twist of the knife. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to write back, to unleash a tidal wave of rage and pain. You destroyed my life. You forged my name. You are a thief. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. It felt like trying to scream in a vacuum. What was the point of explaining the wound to the person holding the knife? She wouldn't understand. She would just cry, and my mother would call me, and I would somehow end up being the villain for upsetting my sister. It was the family script, and I was tired of playing my part. I switched the phone off and tossed it onto the sofa, where it lay dark and silent. The isolation was a physical presence, a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. I had wonderful friends, people I'd known for years, but the thought of telling them was unbearable. How do you even begin to explain that your own mother and sister orchestrated a massive financial fraud against you? It sounded like something out of a melodramatic movie, too outlandish to be real. A part of me was deeply, profoundly ashamed, as if their crime was a reflection of my own failure. I had failed to see them for who they really were. I had failed to protect myself, so I said nothing. I called in sick to work, claiming I had a terrible flu that just wouldn't quit. My boss, who had always valued my reliability, was starting to sound concerned, then annoyed. My apartment became my world. The sun would rise, and I would watch the light crawl across my floor. The sun would set, and I would watch the shadows grow long and dark. I lived on saltine crackers and tap water, because the simple act of preparing a meal, chopping vegetables, boiling water, felt like an insurmountable task requiring energy I didn't possess. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic, looping monologue in my own head. In that silence, I began to sift through the wreckage of my memories, re-examining my entire life through this new harsh lens. Every time I'd paid Lauren's bills, every time I'd dropped everything to rescue her from a self-made crisis, every time my parents had praised me for being responsible, it wasn't love. It was training. It was conditioning. They were programming me, year after year, to accept my role as the family's designated adult, their perpetual safety net. They weren't raising a daughter, they were cultivating a resource. The realization was a slow, creeping horror that settled deep in my bones. You don't apologize to a resource. You don't consider its feelings. You just use it until it runs dry. One evening, I was standing at my living room window looking down at the street below. A father was teaching his little girl how to ride her bike. She wobbled, her face a mask of intense concentration, and then she fell, her bike clattering to the pavement. Before she could even cry out, he was there, scooping her up, his large hands gentle on her small frame. He brushed the dirt from her knee, kissed her forehead, and whispered something that made her giggle through her tears. He set her back on the seat, gave her a steadying hand, and let her try again. It was such a simple, mundane act of parental love and protection, and it broke me. A sob tore through me. A raw, ragged sound that came from the deepest part of my soul. It was a sound of pure, untempered grief for a love I had never known. I slid down the wall and curled into a ball on the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees as if to hold myself together. And I wept. I wept for the little girl I had been, who had spent her life performing, striving, and contorting herself to earn a love that was never really there. I wept for the woman who had been foolish enough to believe that duty and sacrifice were the same as love. And I wept for the person I was now, completely and utterly alone, a ghost in her own life, haunted by the people who were supposed to love her most. It wasn't one single, dramatic explosion that marked my breaking point. There was no climactic, tear-soaked confrontation. There was no moment of righteous fury where I smashed a framed family photo against the wall. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, exactly 15 days after I received the letter from the bank. The catalyst was not a shout, but a whisper. The quiet, digital chime of a notification from my phone. It was the mundane, bureaucratic nature of it all that finally pushed me over the edge. The morning started like all the others in the preceding 2 weeks. I woke up with a dull headache, the familiar result of a shallow, dream-plagued sleep. The stale taste of anxiety was in my mouth. I swung my legs out of bed and the room felt tilted, unsteady. I moved through my silent apartment like an automaton, my actions devoid of thought or purpose. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger, a pale woman with dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and stared out the window at the same unchanging view. Another day stretched before me, a vast, empty expanse of time that I had no idea how to fill. I was in a holding pattern, a victim paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal, waiting for, I didn't know what. Then my phone, which I had reluctantly turned back on to check for work emails, buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a push alert from my banking app. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. It was probably just a low balance warning, another reminder of how my carefully constructed financial stability was crumbling while I was too numb to function. But some morbid curiosity made me pick it up. I unlocked the screen, and my eyes scanned the words. My blood, which had felt sluggish and heavy in my veins, turned to ice. Automatic withdrawal processed. $3,800 coin to Liberty National Bank. $3,800. Gone. Just like that. It wasn't just that they had used my name and my credit to secure the loan. It wasn't just that they had forged my signature and lied to my face. They had also gone into my personal bank accounts and set up an automatic payment plan. The sheer, calculated audacity of it was breathtaking. It was a level of violation I hadn't even considered. They had arranged for me to silently bleed out, month after month, to pay for my sister's dream house. They assumed I was so disconnected from my own life, so accustomed to cleaning up their financial messes, that I would either not notice for a while or simply accept it as another one of my unspoken duties. They had not only stolen my future, they had arranged for me to personally finance the theft. I started to laugh. It was a horrible sound. It wasn't a laugh of joy or humor. It was a dry, hollow, rattling sound that scraped its way up from my throat, raw and painful. It was the sound of a person breaking, of a dam of suppressed grief and rage finally giving way. I laughed out loud in my silent apartment, the sound bouncing off the walls of my small kitchen. The absurdity was just too much. They had stolen my future, and they had arranged for me to pay for it in monthly installments. The laughter died as quickly as it started, leaving a dead, ringing silence in its wake. But in that silence, a profound shift occurred. The thick fog of shock, grief, and helpless victimhood that had been suffocating me for 2 weeks began to burn away. It was replaced by a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time, a cold, clear, and absolute rage. It was a clean, purifying fire. The victim who had been crying on the floor and wasting away in her apartment was gone. Someone else was in charge now. Someone who was done being sad and was ready to be angry. Someone who was done being a resource and was ready to be a reckoning. I stood up from the table, my movements sharp and deliberate. There was no more hesitation, no more shuffling. I walked to my laptop on the small desk in the living room and flipped it open. For the past 2 weeks, my internet search history had been a pathetic litany of helplessness. How to forgive your family, signs of emotional manipulation, dealing with narcissistic parents. Can a family recover from financial fraud? I had been looking for a way to understand, to process, to somehow find a path back to a family that had proven it didn't exist. Now, my fingers moved over the keyboard with a new and unfamiliar certainty. I methodically deleted the old searches one by one. Healing, gone. Forgiveness, gone. Mediation, gone. It was a cleansing ritual, erasing the last traces of the person who had been willing to negotiate her own destruction. I wasn't looking for understanding anymore. I was looking for ammunition. My fingers typed a new phrase, the words feeling powerful and strange on my own screen. Identity theft attorney, Austin, Texas. A list of names and law firms filled the page. Before, the idea of involving lawyers, of making this an official legal battle, had felt like a terrifying act of war against my own family, a betrayal of the unspoken code. But staring at the fresh $3,800 hole in my bank account, I finally understood. The war had already been declared, the first shots fired long ago without my knowledge. I was the only one on the battlefield and I was unarmed. They had made their choice. They had chosen my sister's comfort over my survival. It was time to make my own choice. My eyes scanned the list, passing over the large corporate firms with their slick, impersonal websites. They felt wrong. Then my gaze landed on a smaller local practice, Whitman Law. The photo on the website was of a man in his late 50s with a serious, no-nonsense face and kind eyes. His name was David Whitman, and his biography said he specialized in financial fraud, particularly cases that occurred within the complex dynamics of family. He knew this specific kind of poison. The phrase made me feel for the first time in weeks that I wasn't insane. This was a thing that happened to other people, a thing you could fight. I was not their insurance policy. I was not their emergency fund. I was not the good daughter who would quietly sacrifice herself on the altar of her sister's happiness. That person had died this morning in a silent apartment, with the sound of a hollow laugh and the digital chime of a bank notification. I picked up my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. The tremor was gone, replaced by a solid, grounding anger. I dialed the number on the screen. When a calm voice answered, "Whitman Law Offices, how can I help you?" My own voice came out clear and strong, a stranger in my own ears. "Hello," I said, and there was no waver, no hint of a tear. "My name is Naomi Carter. I need to make an appointment to report a crime." Walking into David Whitman's law office felt like stepping into another world. It wasn't the intimidating glass and steel tower I had envisioned from legal dramas on TV. It was in a modest, older brick building downtown, the kind with creaky wooden floors and tall, wavy glass windows that let in the afternoon light. The air inside smelled of old paper, leather, and freshly brewed coffee. It was the smell of order, of history, of problems being methodically solved. After weeks of living in the chaotic, suffocating silence of my apartment, this calm, professional space felt like the first breath of clean air after a long illness. David Whitman himself was exactly as his photo suggested. He was a man in his late 50s, with graying hair at the temples and a calm, steady gaze that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He wasn't overly friendly or effusive. There was no false sympathy in his handshake. He offered me a bottle of water, gestured to a worn leather chair opposite his large oak desk, and got straight to the point. "Tell me what happened," he said, his voice even and direct. So I did. For the first time, I said all of it out loud to another human being who wasn't part of the poison. I laid out the whole ugly story, from my role as the family fixer to the golden child worship of my sister Lauren. My voice was shaky at first, but as I spoke, a strange strength began to build. The act of giving words to the betrayal, of structuring it into a coherent narrative, made it feel less like a monstrous, all-consuming fog and more like a problem that could be examined and perhaps solved. I told him about the birthday dinner, the toast to new beginnings, and finally I told him about the letter from the bank. I slid the folder I had brought across the polished wooden table. It contained everything: the delinquency notice, the copies of the loan application, and the forged signature page. He picked up the documents, his movements deliberate and efficient. He didn't offer any comforting murmurs or shocked gasps. He simply read, his expression unreadable. He flipped through the pages like a surgeon reviewing a patient's x-rays, his focus absolute. I watched his eyes scan my stolen financial identity, my social security number, my employment history, my salary. It felt deeply exposing, but under his professional gaze, it was transformed from a source of shame into simple, irrefutable evidence. He spent a long time looking at the application, then at my signature. He held the page up to the light, his eyes narrowing slightly. This kind of fraud, the most devastating kind, always starts with trust, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of experience. He placed the papers back on the desk and looked directly at me. The victims never see it coming because they can't imagine the person they love is capable of doing something like this. They assume it's a mistake. They try to fix it quietly. They try to forgive. They get dragged down with the ship because they're trying to save the person who is actively drilling holes in the hull. His words resonated so deeply they made my chest ache. He was describing my entire life, my entire instinctual reaction to this crisis. My first impulse had been to make it go away quietly, to absorb the damage. He tapped a finger on the signature page. "They traced you," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "Someone close, someone who has seen you sign your name hundreds, maybe thousands of times. Someone who knew your handwriting well enough to mimic it, but not well enough to understand the mechanics of how you form the letters." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The validation was so powerful it almost brought me to tears. He saw it. He saw the truth. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. I was a victim of a calculated crime. "My sister," I finally managed to whisper. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. I assumed as much. He leaned back in his chair, the old leather creaking softly. He steepled his fingers, looking at me with an intensity that was neither kind nor unkind. It was the look of a man assessing a situation, weighing the costs. "Here is what you need to understand, Naomi," he said, his tone serious. "If we move forward, there is no going back. The path you've been on your whole life, the one where you absorb the damage to keep the peace, that path closes forever. We will file a police report. We will file a fraud affidavit with the bank. We will notify the credit bureaus. We will initiate a process that will have serious, life-altering consequences for your sister, and by extension, your parents." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The bank will try to hold you liable. They will look for any sign of complicity, Any hint that you knew about this and let it happen. Your family will call you a traitor. They will try to guilt you, shame you, and manipulate you into dropping this. They will tell you that you are tearing the family apart. They will use every tool in their emotional arsenal to make you feel like the villain in this story. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze direct and unflinching, pinning me in my chair. So I have to ask you one question, and I need you to be absolutely sure of your answer. Are you ready to burn every bridge? The question hung in the air between us, stark and final. Burn every bridge. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal description of the choice in front of me. I saw it all in a flash. The end of holidays together, the end of phone calls, the end of any pretense that we were a family. It meant turning my back on the two people who brought me into this world and the one person who had shared my childhood. It was the loneliest, most terrifying prospect I could imagine. But then, I thought of my mother's cold voice on the phone. It's your duty. I thought of my sister's casual text about brunch, sent while she was living in a house my stolen future was paying for. I thought of the $3,800 that had vanished from my bank account, a quiet, clinical theft that they felt entitled to. They weren't bridges of love and support. They were rickety one-way walkways that only ever led from my life to theirs. I was the only one who ever traveled across them, always carrying something: money, time, forgiveness. They had already soaked those bridges in gasoline when they chose my sister's wants over my fundamental right to my own life. They had lit the match when they forged my name. They were just waiting for me to walk across one last time so they could watch me go up in flames with the rest of it. I looked David Whitman directly in the eye, and the last of my fear and hesitation dissolved, burned away by the cold, hard certainty that had taken its place. They already burned them, I said, my voice quiet but firm as steel. I'm just here to collect the ashes. A small, almost imperceptible nod was his only reply. He didn't smile, but for the first time I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. He pulled a yellow legal pad towards him and picked up a pen. His entire demeanor shifted from philosophical to practical, from a man asking about the emotional cost to a general laying out a battle plan. Okay, Naomi, he said, his voice crisp and full of purpose. Let's get to work. The first thing we're going to do is call the police. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again, a full, deep breath that reached the bottom of my lungs. I wasn't alone in that quiet, suffocating apartment anymore. I had an ally, and the person who had walked into this office, a victim drowning in debt and betrayal, was not the same person who was about to walk out. I was no longer just Naomi Carter, the good daughter. I was a client, and I was ready to fight. The days that followed my meeting with David Whitman were a blur of methodical, deliberate action. There was no more crying, no more staring at the walls. My grief and shock had been transmuted into fuel for a quiet, cold engine of justice. My revenge wasn't going to be loud or explosive. It was going to be precise, official, and executed through the cold, undeniable machinery of the law. Every step felt both terrifying and liberating, like I was dismantling a bomb that had been strapped to my chest my entire life. The first step was the hardest. Guided by David, who had prepped me on exactly what to say and what documents to bring, I walked into the main Austin Police Department precinct downtown. The air inside was sterile, smelling of disinfectant and bureaucracy. I sat on a hard plastic chair in a waiting area, my folder of evidence clutched in my lap like a shield. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the point of no return. This was making it real. The officer who took my statement was a young man with a tired, bored expression, as if he was hearing another story of a petty squabble. He typed slowly with 2 fingers, his gaze fixed on his computer screen. But as I laid out the documents on his desk, the bank letter, the forged mortgage agreement, the record of the automatic withdrawal, my driver's license with my real left-handed signature, his demeanor changed. The boredom evaporated, replaced by a professional seriousness. He picked up the forged document, looked at it, then looked at my license. That's a damn good forgery, he muttered, almost to himself. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes held a flicker of sympathy. This was your sister? Yes, I said, my voice not wavering. He shook his head slightly and went back to typing, his fingers moving much faster now. He asked me a series of questions in a calm, procedural tone. Was I willing to testify? Yes. Did I give them permission to access my information? Yes. Did I want to press charges? Yes. When he was done, he handed me a slip of paper with a case number on it. That number felt like a physical object, a shield I could hold. It was official. It was real. I had told the truth to an authority figure, and he had believed me. I walked out of the police station into the bright Texas sun, feeling lighter than I had in years. The next steps were a flurry of emails and certified letters, all handled by David's office. He was my firewall. He drafted a formal fraud affidavit, which I signed and had notarized. He sent it, along with the police report number, to Liberty National Bank's legal department. He contacted the 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and placed a fraud alert on my accounts, officially disputing the fraudulent mortgage that had appeared on my credit report. Every action was a quiet click of a lock falling into place. Each step was a brick I was laying, building a wall between me and the mess my family had created. It was a strange feeling. For my entire life, my purpose had been to absorb their chaos. Now, my purpose was to contain it, to build a legal fortress around myself that they could not penetrate. I didn't tell them what I was doing. There were no warning phone calls, no dramatic confrontations. I had already tried talking. I had been dismissed. So now I let the system do the talking. I went back to work. I walked into my office, apologized to my boss for my extended absence, and told him a sanitized version of the truth, that I had been the victim of a serious case of identity theft that I was now resolving with legal help. He was surprisingly understanding. He saw the new determination in my eyes, the absence of the victim I had been, and he just nodded and said, "Welcome back. Let us know what you need." Immersing myself in the logic and order of spreadsheets and shipping schedules was a balm to my soul. It was a world where things made sense, where actions had predictable consequences. The silence from my family lasted for 2 weeks. Then the earthquake I had started sent its first powerful tremor. I received a letter in the mail, again from Liberty National. This time, the envelope didn't fill me with dread. I opened it with a steady hand. It was short and formal. It stated that, pending the outcome of their internal and the ongoing criminal investigation, the mortgage account under my name had been officially frozen. All automatic withdrawals were permanently suspended. They also informed me that, as per their protocol in a criminal fraud case, the foreclosure process on the property had been initiated. I read the letter 3 times, letting the words wash over me. Suspended, frozen, foreclosure. The bleeding had stopped. The $3,800 they had stolen from me would be the last dollar they ever got. A wave of relief so profound it made me dizzy washed over me. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted from my chest, allowing me to finally take a full, deep breath. It took another week for my family to feel the aftershock. The first call came from my mother. Her name flashed on my screen, and for a moment, the old, conditioned fear made my stomach clench. The muscle memory of compliance was strong, but I took a breath, straightened my back, and answered, my voice calm and even. "Hello?" Her voice was not. It was a high-pitched shriek, vibrating with a rage I had never heard from her before. It was the sound of a cornered animal. "Naomi Catherine Carter, what have you done?" There was no preamble, no hello, just pure, undiluted fury. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my tone placid, a deliberate counterpoint to her hysteria. "The bank. We got a letter from the bank. They're foreclosing on Lauren's house. They're saying the mortgage is under a fraud investigation. A criminal investigation, Naomi. How could you do this to your sister? You're ruining her life." The blame, as always, was pointed directly at me. Not at the person who committed the felony, but at the person who reported it. The familiar dynamic was so predictable it was almost comforting. I was the problem. I was the one causing the drama. "Let me rephrase that for you, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "The question isn't how could I do this to her. It's how could I stop her from continuing to do this to me. You are tearing this family apart," she screamed into the phone. Her voice was cracking now, breaking under the weight of her own panic. The consequences were finally real. They were no longer an abstract problem for good, stable Naomi to solve. The consequences had arrived at her doorstep in a certified letter. I thought of all the years I had spent absorbing their chaos, fixing their mistakes, and managing their emotions. I thought of the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the quiet resentment I had swallowed down to keep the peace. The peace was never real. It was just the absence of their problems. "No," I said, and the single word was filled with a finality that silenced her mid-rant. "You did. You tore this family apart a long time ago when you decided I was a bank account, not a daughter. You tore it apart when you toasted to my future while you were actively destroying it." I paused, letting the truth of that statement hang in the heavy air between us. "I'm just cleaning up the mess," I added softly. And then, before she could respond, before she could unleash another wave of guilt or rage or crocodile tears, I did something I had never done before in my entire life. I pressed the red icon on my screen. I hung up on my mother. The silence that followed was the sweetest, most profound sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage door swinging open. It was the sound of my own freedom. The weeks that followed my final phone call with my mother were a strange mix of unnerving silence and distant, rumbling chaos. I heard nothing directly from my family. No more angry calls, no pleading texts, no emails filled with manufactured guilt. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world, and in a way I had. The Naomi they knew, the compliant, endlessly forgiving fixer who would always absorb their dysfunction, was gone. I had excommunicated myself by refusing to be their victim, and without my designated role, they had no use for me. The silence was a confirmation of what I had learned. My presence in the family was conditional upon my utility. News of the fallout reached me in fragments, through the small-town gossip mill that inevitably connects all suburbs. An old acquaintance from high school, a woman named Sarah who I hadn't spoken to in years but was connected to on social media, sent me a tentative message. "Hey Naomi, weird question and feel free to tell me to buzz off, but is everything okay with your sister? I live a few streets over from her and there's a foreclosure notice on her front door. Hope you're all okay." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The old me would have felt a surge of shame, a desperate need to protect the family's image. The old me would have lied, crafting a vague story about a job loss or a temporary setback. The new me felt a calm detachment. I typed back a simple, honest response. "It's a complicated situation. Thanks for your concern." I didn't need to explain or defend. The truth has a way of seeping out, especially when it involves something as visible as a 4-bedroom house in a manicured neighborhood, where appearances are everything. 2 months after I filed the police report, the House of Lies collapsed completely. The foreclosure was finalized. Lauren's dream life, funded by my stolen future, was officially over. I saw the pictures online. One day, her address was a happy Zillow listing with sunny photos of her perfectly staged furniture. The next, it was a grim bank-owned property listing. The photos were of empty, echoing rooms. The granite countertops where she'd entertained her friends looked cold and sterile. The spacious living room where my parents had probably beamed with pride was just a hollow, beige box. The dream had been repossessed. The same neighbors who used to admire Lauren's seemingly effortless success and her brand-new SUV now watched as a budget-moving truck pulled up to her curb. There was no grand exit, just a quiet, shameful retreat in the middle of a Tuesday. Sarah messaged me again. "OMG, your sister is moving out. The whole neighborhood is watching. People are talking." The whispers started as speculation. "Financial trouble," some said. Then, as the details of the fraud investigation began to leak, the whispers grew into a more defined, more scandalous story. "A family dispute," others murmured. Finally, the ugly truth began to take shape. Forged documents, an identity theft claim, a criminal investigation. The story was too juicy, too dramatic to stay hidden for long. Lauren, the golden child who had always floated through life on a cloud of charm and privilege, was now the subject of neighborhood gossip. Her perfect image was shattered. Then my father called. It was the first time I'd heard his voice since before the letter had arrived. He didn't yell like my mother had. His approach was different, more insidious. He tried to sound noble like the calm, rational patriarch trying to mend his broken family. "Naomi," he began, his voice low and reasonable, the tone he always used when he was about to explain why I was wrong about something. "This has all gone too far. Your mother is a wreck. She can't sleep. And your sister is devastated. Her life is ruined." I waited, saying nothing. I refused to fill the silence, to make it easier for him. "We can fix this privately," he continued, his voice taking on a tone of magnanimous authority, as if he were offering me a generous deal. "You can withdraw the police report. It's not too late. You can tell the bank it was all a misunderstanding. We can work out a payment plan, all of us together. There's no need to involve outsiders in our family business." Outsiders. The word was so telling. The police, the lawyers, the bankers, they were the outsiders. He still couldn't see it. He couldn't understand that he, my mother, and my sister were the ones who had made me an outsider in my own family. They had drawn a tight circle around the three of them, and their actions had placed me firmly on the other side of it. "There is no we anymore, Dad," I replied, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake. "And this stopped being family business the moment you decided to commit a felony using my name." "Don't use that word," he said, his voice rising in frustration, the calm facade beginning to crack. "It wasn't like that. You know it wasn't. We were trying to help your sister. We were trying to hold this family together. You weren't helping her," I said, the truth of it sharp and clean in my own ears. "You were enabling her. You have been her whole life, and you were sacrificing me to do it." You stopped being insiders when you signed my name on that document. That's when you became outsiders to my life." He was silent for a long moment, clearly unprepared for my refusal to bend, for my refusal to accept his narrative. "You're being cold, Naomi," he finally said, his last-ditch attempt at emotional manipulation. "This isn't you. You've always been the compassionate one." "You're right," I said, and I felt a strange sense of peace in the admission. "It isn't me. Not anymore. The old me, the compassionate one you could always count on to clean up your messes, is gone. You got rid of her." I ended the call. There was nothing left to say. His attempt to fix it privately wasn't about protecting the family. It was about protecting their reputation. It was damage control. But the damage was done, and the truth was out. The final nail in the coffin of their public image came a week later. The local paper, a small community weekly that usually covered town hall meetings and high school football games, ran a short piece in the business section. It was a general interest story, an interview with a financial planner about the rising cases of financial fraud within families, talked about the dangers of sharing personal information and the legal ramifications of forging documents for loans. They didn't print our names. They didn't have to. But they mentioned a recent notable local case involving a large mortgage in the North Austin suburbs that had ended in foreclosure and a criminal investigation. Everyone in our town, everyone who knew the Carters and their 2 daughters, knew exactly who that story was about. The shame was no longer a private matter, whispered between neighbors. It was public knowledge printed in black and white. Their carefully constructed image of the perfect, successful family had crumbled into dust, and I hadn't raised my voice once. I had simply told the truth, quietly and officially, and let the consequences unfold like a slow, unstoppable earthquake. A year can change everything. 12 months after my final, chilling phone call with my father, the legal dust had finally settled. The criminal investigation had concluded, finding Lauren fully responsible for the fraud. My lawyer David had explained my options. I could push for the harshest possible penalties, which could include jail time. The thought was tempting for a fleeting, vengeful moment. I imagined her in a prison jumpsuit, finally facing a consequence she couldn't charm her way out of. But when it came down to it, I found I didn't want revenge. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted peace. I informed the prosecutor that I did not wish to see my sister incarcerated. In the end, she received a felony conviction that would follow her for the rest of her life, a court order for restitution that I knew I'd never see a penny of, and a 5-year probation sentence. Her financial reputation was completely destroyed. The bank, in a formal letter, officially released me from any and all liability for the fraudulent mortgage. My name was finally legally my own again. The credit bureaus, after months of painstaking work, cleared the fraudulent activity from my reports. On paper, it was as if it had never happened. But it had happened, and it had changed me in ways that could never be erased. The old Naomi, the one who constantly sought approval and bent over backward to keep a false peace, was gone for good. She felt like a person I used to know, a naive girl I felt a little sorry for. In her place was someone quieter, stronger, and far more discerning about who she let into her life. I had spent the year healing. Not forgiving, not yet, but healing. I went to therapy, where I learned to unpack a lifetime of conditioning. I learned that duty and love are not the same thing. I learned to set boundaries that were not walls of anger, but fences of self-respect. I reconnected with my real friends, the ones who had listened to my story with horror and supported me without question. I worked hard, picking up extra projects, and with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed, I rebuilt my savings account, the one that had been intended for a condo. And then, one sunny Saturday afternoon in late autumn, I did something just for me. I bought my own house. It was nothing like the sprawling, ostentatious house Lauren had tried to steal. There were no granite countertops or walk-in closets. It was a small 2-bedroom bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street, built in the 1950s. It had original hardwood floors that creaked in a comforting way, and a big, mature oak tree in the front yard that reminded me of the one at her old house, only this one was mine. It had a small, screened-in porch, perfect for a rocking chair and a cup of coffee on a warm evening. It was modest. It was manageable. It was peaceful. The day of the closing, I sat in a different lawyer's office, not David's, but a real estate attorney's. The room was bright and impersonal, filled with stacks of paper, each one requiring my signature. I picked up the pen, a simple blue ballpoint, and my hand was perfectly steady. As I signed my name again and again and again, each stroke of ink on paper felt like a profound act of reclamation. Naomi K. Carter. This was my name, on my documents, for my house. There were no forged signatures, no hidden strings, no secret, crushing debts. Each signature felt like I was overwriting the fraudulent one, erasing its power with my own authentic mark. When I was done, the attorney smiled and slid a small, plain envelope across the table. Inside were the keys. They were simple brass keys on a plain silver ring, but they felt as heavy and significant as a crown. I walked out into the sunshine, got in my car, and drove to my house, my home. I stood on the small concrete porch for a long time before putting the key in the lock. The click of the tumbler turning was the most satisfying sound in the world. Inside, the house was empty. The rooms echoed with every step I took on the wooden floors. But it wasn't an empty, lonely feeling. It was the emptiness of a blank canvas. It was the quiet of possibility. It was a future I would build myself, on my own terms. I walked through the living room, into the small kitchen with its retro yellow-tiled counters, and looked out the window at my backyard. A real backyard, with a small patch of grass and a place for a garden. I leaned against the counter and I didn't smile. Not a big performative smile. It was just a small, quiet lifting of the corners of my mouth. It was the feeling of peace settling into my bones. I still get emails from my mother sometimes. They come every few months, usually around holidays or my birthday, their arrival a predictable, unwelcome ghost. They are always the same, a cloying mix of false nostalgia and passive-aggressive guilt. The last one arrived a week ago. Dearest Naomi, I was looking through old photo albums today and found a picture of you and Lauren building a snowman. You two were always so close. My heart aches for what has been lost. We all make mistakes. Family is forever. Don't you miss your sister? I saw her the other day and she looks so thin. I worry about her constantly. I hope you are well. Love, Mom. She never mentions the $500,000 felony. She never apologizes. In her carefully curated version of history, my refusal to be a silent victim is still the great family tragedy, a baffling act of cruelty on my part. I read the email, and I feel nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a distant, clinical pity for a woman so trapped in her own narrative that she will never be able to see the truth. Then I press delete. I never respond. Because I've learned the most important lesson of my life. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the fire just because you're no longer burning. Forgiveness, for me, is the quiet act of closing the door, locking it, and walking away. It's choosing my own quiet, creaky, peaceful house over their grand, chaotic, collapsing castle. My name is Naomi Carter, and this house, this quiet, this life, it's all mine. And it is more than enough. Family can share your blood and still drain your life. They can tell you it's love while they're handing you the bill for their happiness. But your name, your future, and your peace are not debts you owe to anyone, no matter who they are. Sometimes the most powerful form of love is self-love. Sometimes love means walking away with your name still yours. If you've ever been treated like a wallet instead of a person, if you've ever had to choose between your own well-being and someone else's expectations, then you know this fight. Hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because peace isn't free. It's not something you're given, it's earned. One truth, one signature, one goodbye at a time.